EdTech Live is sponsored by K12Computers.com, where you can save an additional $50 each on factory refurbished Dell Optiplex computers for use with Linux, and by TechnologyRescue.com, helping schools implement Linux thin client labs at a fraction of the cost of traditional computing. Welcome to EdTech Live. This is Steve Hargadon, and today is Friday, August 25th, and I'm having a conversation with Robert Arkiletian, who is the father of FL Teacher Tool. And for those who have been involved in LTSP and K12LTSP, they'll recognize this as a tremendous program that has really made a difference for those who are interested in implementing Linux thin client in a classroom environment. Welcome, Robert.
Thank you. Thanks, Steve.
I'm glad to be visiting with you. We share a common passion, the interest in implementing Linux thin client in schools. Can you tell me a little bit about yourself and your background, and maybe then tell us a little bit about how FL Teacher Tool got started?
Sure. Well, I can tell you a bit about myself. I'm just a teacher. I teach physics and computer programming at Eric Hamber Secondary School in Vancouver, Canada. And I was, beginning of 2004, I was, teaching C++ in my programming class, and at that point, around January of 2004, I had personally gotten into Linux for about a couple of years. I was running Slackware at home, and so I had like a little bit of an interest in Linux, but I didn't know about K12LTSP. And then I was just browsing the web one day, and I came along an article in, of all places, Linux Journal magazine online, and it was a article that said a computer lab with no windows, and it was by C.T. Leung, and it was about the high school in Manitoba, the largest high school, Sizzler High, and it talked about Mr. Leung implementing K12LTSP in his school, and all the benefits and all the cost savings of licensing, et cetera, which I'm sure some of your readers are aware of. So when I saw that, the funny thing was, at my school, we were actually in the process of deciding on upgrading my computer lab. And we were going to get 30 brand new machines, about $30,000, and about another $10,000 for software, so about $40,000. And I suggested, hey, look, let's try this. Initially, there was a lot of opposition to it in my school. In fact, I was kind of surprised as to how much opposition there was. Basically, it was just a fear of the unknown. Nobody really, we have a technology committee at my school, and so nobody really knew about Linux. It was completely an unknown, and so there was some hesitancy. A lot of people wanted to stick to the status quo. And so some of the things which I kind of did to get K12LTSP in the door, and that eventually led me to programming FL Teacher Tool, was that I said, well, the amount of money which would spend would be less than $5,000. We just stick with our old computers, which, by the way, are Pentium 2, 233 megahertz machines, with like around 128, about 196 megabytes of RAM, which is barely enough to run Windows NT at the time. That's what we were using, and even like I couldn't. Partially, the reason that I really wanted to upgrade was because I couldn't upgrade the C++ compiler, because the new one, the 3.0 GCC, was too slow. So I had to stick with an old compiler, and I thought, well, geez, this isn't allowing me to implement my curriculum. So that's when the upgrade kind of motivation began, and part of the reason that I was able to get in the door was that I said, well, look, we're not spending any money on Linux or software at all. I said, that's all free. I said, we're simply going to be spending money on one server under $5,000. And I said, if we can run it as a pilot project. And I said, if it doesn't work, we can always take that server and stick, whatever proprietary software we'd want to put on that and use it as a file server or whatever. So really, I said, there isn't really any money wasted. And the other thing which I made a point of was that we could dual boot the machine, so I wouldn't actually erase Windows NT off of the hard drives. I would just leave it on there and dual boot, where I would have an option when you start the machine of running Windows NT or booting off of the LTSP server. So to this day, still, my students have that option. Although in 2 years nobody's really run Windows NT, we're all using K12LTSP now. So those are some of the things that really kind of help, because you realize that you're not spending money on another piece of software. You're spending money on hardware, which is kind of operating system agnostic. It doesn't matter what you put on it. It's your choice what you want to install on that hardware. So in terms of funding, it's a no-lose situation. You can't lose, even if you decide not to stick with it. The money's still well spent.
So part of what you said, I think, helps to explain some of the implementation patterns for Linux Thin Client in schools. That typically there's been a champion, and the champion has been technology-oriented, because with a champion of that type, you can make that argument. I'm going to do it. I'm going to set it up. The only costs are going to be hardware. It's low risk. I think that in some ways that also defines the barrier to entry for schools that are looking to have somebody else implement it for them, because all of a sudden there are other costs. There's there's hiring somebody to do it, and then there's just this great unknown. At least here in the States, my experience has been that taking a risk in a public school is very difficult, because you're typically going to be working in that school or in the district or in a school system for the rest of your life, and you don't necessarily want to be remembered as the guy who, installed the system that didn't work.
Mm-hmm.
If everybody else is buying Dell, then it's pretty safe to buy Dell. Now that may not be an accurate perception, but it does seem like your particular circumstance really defines pretty well those successful implementations.
Yeah, and I can tell you that in the 2 years that we have been, we've been running it, we started in May 2004, so we've been running it now for more than 2 years. And I haven't had 1 day of downtime. So for 2, school years, it's been up all the time. And I can't say the same for, a lot of other labs, computer labs that schools implement. It's just really, really robust, and it's been wonderful, actually. And to tell you the truth, now that the school has seen it in action, and most of the teachers, in fact, in my school have used it, because it's not just my computer lab, it's also a general purpose lab where teachers can bring in their social studies blocks or English blocks, or math blocks, and come in and log in. It's really well accepted, and people really enjoy, teachers, and not just students. The students liked it right after that, but now even teachers like it because they realize how easy it is and how reliable it is. So it really has been a success.
So how much of that being up for 2 years without a single day of downtime, do you attribute to the actual system itself versus your capability of knowing what to do should something go wrong with the Linux Thin Client?
Well, I think there's a number of factors here in terms of the reasons for its reliability. Number one, obviously, Linux is to this day and age, it's an industrial strength operating system. A lot of high-profile companies use Linux for mission-critical applications. So in that sense, you can have months and months of uptime without turning the server off, and and it just chugs along. But I would say there's another aspect to its reliability, and that I think I can attribute to the maker of the distribution K12LTSP, and that's Eric Harrison. He's really done a wonderful job in making it really turnkey and easy to use. I didn't really have to use any of my previous Linux knowledge. Had I been a person who didn't know anything in Linux, I still could have implemented it. It's just Eric makes it so simple. You just click next, 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 and you're up and running. It's really a testament to his distribution, K12LTSP.
So I think, I asked that question, knowing the answer for myself at least, but also I think it's worth just talking out loud about it. I think to some degree, somebody who doesn't know anything about Linux is going to need somebody that they can count on, to help them in certain circumstances where, they need to change a user account, or there's something that maybe we're familiar with doing in Windows, but we don't know how to do in Linux. But I found that within, if I'm doing an implementation for a school, within a half a day, I can get people to a comfort level, just in terms of the user interface, the programs that are available, and an understanding of how it works. And then the help after that really is incredibly minimal.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, I agree with you too. There's really basic things that, as a person who's implementing it, you need to know, like how to add a user, how to delete users, how to install a program. And it doesn't take a long time to learn that. Like you said, half a day would probably be sufficient for that type of a thing. So, yes, in a sense, there has to be a little bit of training for the person who's administering it. But usually I find that if there isn't a champion in the school who kind of says, okay, look, I'll take care of it, it's very easy for a person who's already a computer technician to be able to pick that stuff up. I don't think it would take them very long. And I know personally of school districts in British Columbia, Canada, that have done that, where they've had a lot of their computer technicians who don't have Linux experience. They've actually had a few of their technicians who do have Linux experience hold workshops and spread their knowledge to the other technicians, and then everybody, all the technicians in the district now have the ability to be able to support it. It doesn't take long. So I know of districts in British Columbia who have done it that way as well.
Well, and I had a very good experience with a district in Yuma, Arizona, and visited with them and did help them as part of their Linux Thin Client setup. And what I noticed, one of the things that they had done that was so smart, was they involved the district technicians in at the immediate first level, and got their buy-in, and then those technicians were very interested in learning how it worked and understanding it and being able to support it. And you and I talked briefly before the interview actually started about the role of technicians in a district, but certainly they're going to want to learn Linux just as much as anybody else. If Linux Thin Client is seen as a threat to them, you may be fighting them all the way. But if it's an opportunity for them to become more familiar with Linux, maybe that's a really good approach to helping implement Linux Thin Client.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think that inherently people who are computer technicians have an interest and a willingness to try and computer technicians are probably just like me. They're just computer geeks and technology geeks. They want to know about certain things and see what new things they can do with their computers. And so learning a new operating system at the level of proficiency where you can actually support K12LTSP is pretty minimal. You don't really have to be a Linux guru to be able to run a K12LTSP system.
No, but if something really went wrong, and it can, because you and I are both familiar with, although the email list, the K12 open source email list, is naturally going to get posting from people who are in circumstances that are more significant than others. But if something really did go wrong, you do have to have somebody to turn to.
Yes. Let's say, for example, good point. If you had something like a hardware failure, having good backups. Let's say if you've got a system running a RAID array and you lose a drive, things like that. And as you mentioned, the list, the K12 OSN list, is an excellent place to get help. I found personally that when I have had questions where I scratch my head and go, I wonder if it's possible to do this, then after posting a question, it hasn't really been even days where I've had to wait for a response. I get responses the same day, maybe within a few hours even, and some of the responses I get are amazing because there's some people on that list with a lot of experience. So it's been excellent in that sense. I mean, when people try comparing support that you get from commercial companies, I've called commercial companies and you leave a message and they never get back to you. So this is even though it's kind of free support, I find it to be far superior to any commercial support that I've ever seen.
And I think that that's great as an anecdotal experience, and I think it's one that's shared by a lot of people. But probably if you're on a school board somewhere making decisions to whether or not to implement something like this, you're probably going to want to know that there's actually a commercial company that can be held responsible or that will take responsibility for helping solve problems. And my guess is that we're going to move, we're going to see companies that will begin to offer those services and will provide that level of comfort that's just needed to say, okay, I'm not going at this alone.
Yeah, you brought up a good point because I really have actually witnessed that myself, where top-level district administrators feel like, they really need to have someone on the line or someone on the hook to be able to say, well, look, if we have a problem, who can we turn to? A lot of them don't feel comfortable with like an open, free model of support because after all, no one's really obligated to help you. A lot of people do, but there's no obligation. Whereas if you pay for support, and there are commercial support options available for Linux and LTSP, basically then administrators, top guys who make district level decisions feel more comfortable because they say, well, okay, we've got support that's 100% reliable, and we're paying for it, and they feel more at ease making those decisions because they don't want to be making decisions where fingers get pointed at anybody in case things don't work out perfectly.
Well, I think that we've done a good job informally here, kind of describing some of the barriers to acceptance. Cost is one. In your situation, we're going to spend the money on this server, but it could be transformed into, a regular Windows server if we need to. A second was, what do we do if we don't like it and it doesn't work? And certainly the dual boot scenario seems to address that pretty well. And I've had the same experience. I did an installation for a school in Utah where they dual booted, and by the end of the school year they weren't dual booting at all. They were just strictly within the Linux environment because it was so much more responsive for them. And then the third being technical support, and addressed maybe both by cultivating an interest of the existing technicians within a school, and also looking to companies that are beginning to provide concrete support services so that there's a sense of comfort as they make a decision. Do you think we've done a good job of giving the 50,000-foot overview?
Yeah, that's a pretty good overview. One thing I will add, though, is a kind of anecdotal, is that initially when I got my approval for installing K12LTSP in my school, like I said, there was some hesitancy and some fear about it. But after 2 years, I've actually had other teachers in the school requesting the same type of setup that I have. Even like drafting teachers show them a program like QCAD, and they just stand there with their eyes in shock, saying, "Wow, this is free! I can't believe it." And then they say, "Well, I want the same type of lab that you've got." So I mean, I've kind of gone around circle where it's not only being accepted, but it's really being appreciated.
And I think that you and I have also talked about the K12LTSP.com website, K12LTSP.org being the site where you can go get the distribution that Eric Harrison has so carefully crafted, but .com being a domain that I actually noticed was available, and I picked it up, and we've created a map of places of schools, libraries, corporations that are implementing Linux Thin Client, that have placed themselves on the map. So hopefully, as that map grows, and I think it's somewhere between 400 and 500 locations so far, you may even be in a position where you could drill down and find somebody locally where you could go look at Linux Thin Client and see how it actually works.
Yeah, that's a nice map. I've actually got it printed out and displayed in my classroom as well. It kind of gives a sense of community to not only myself, but also my students get to see, what other places are doing what we're doing.
Well, I know I was talking to a school in Santa Cruz that just had no idea of what Linux Thin Client was, and I looked at this map, which I had helped facilitate getting up, but really had no idea who had ultimately signed up on it, and drilled down to Santa Cruz, California, and discovered that the Santa Cruz public libraries were all using Linux Thin Client. So was able to point them there right away.
Yeah.
There's another project we could brainstorm on. It's occurred to me that if somebody would actually videotape a lab, talk to some students, do some interviews, do sort of a nice promo piece on Linux Thin Client, that we could post it at Google Video or YouTube, and have a nice little place where someone could actually see a school using it in action. Which probably doesn't mean a whole lot, but emotionally might actually make someone feel more comfortable.
Yeah. I think another good idea for a video being up and available online would be perhaps even showing how simple it is to install K12LTSP. I think a lot of people would be really surprised as to how easy it is simply just to set up an entire classroom, and how quick and easy it is. There's, like they say, a picture's worth 1,000 words. Until you actually see someone do it, you'll think it's a little, well, I don't know how to do that. I've never done that before. If there's like a little video like that, I think if someone would be willing to do that, that would help things out a lot too, and really take away the fear of someone actually going ahead and installing it who'd never done it before.
I actually think that Scott Belford in Hawaii has done that, and we'll leave it to our listeners to do a search at Google Video, but I think HOSEF, the Hawaiian Open Source Education Foundation, and Scott Belford, he went on a local cable TV show and did an installation of Linux Thin Client server, so you can search for that. Robert, how many machines are you actually running at your school?
On K12LTSP or in general?
On K12LTSP.
One lab, so 32 clients, and I got one server.
And just so people know, how powerful a server is that? What kind of resources did you need to build that server?
Sure. I decided to go a little bit, I should say, more than perhaps what I needed, just to be sure that I was going to be okay. I got at the time, remember I got this in May of 2004. I got a dual Xeon motherboard, so server board with 2.8 gigahertz CPUs in it and 4 gigabytes of RAM. And I got two 10,000 RPM SCSI drives. And actually, my SCSI drives aren't even that big. They're like 36 gigs apiece. And right now I've got them in a RAID 1, software RAID, which is really robust in Linux. And it's been great.
So just for perspective, that was probably not a cheap machine 2 years ago, but in terms of purchase now, it actually would be a relatively modest configuration.
Yeah, actually, that's something that's really changed in the last couple of years is the amount of power you can buy in terms of processing power with money. I mean, now dual-core CPUs are very common. Back then they weren't, so I got a dual CPU. Now you could even, buy perhaps not even a server board. So a lot of desktop motherboards now have the ability to support a dual-core processor, which could provide the power for a classroom. I will say, though, that SCSI disks at this point are nice to have. They're faster, but SATA drives are really catching up, and I think they're also sufficient to be able to support a classroom. One note I will tell you, though, kind of an interesting point, is that when I did implement my server, I used the existing network infrastructure, which was a hub, for my 32 clients. And I tell you, that was a learning experience because the collision LED on my hub wouldn't actually go off. It was on constantly. So that was a learning experience. For any of you guys out there who are going to try to do this, don't use a hub. Get a switch.
Certainly the switch makes a huge difference because what you're really talking about is, at the point at which you build a lab with Linux Thin Client, you're really talking about a network. The client workstations are just, they're reflecting what's taking place on the server, and they're sending keystrokes and mouse movements back and forth. And, so typically if something goes wrong, it's going to be a network problem. If the workstation stops responding, at least in my experience, the first thing you do is you check the networking cables. I would say that based on what you've described in terms of your hardware resources, I would feel very comfortable going up to 40 or 50, maybe even 60 machines with that configuration, if you're not doing anything super demanding, just for regular use. And that particular configuration is pretty widely available in what used to be called a workstation. A dual Xeon machine with SCSI drives. And so certainly from the standpoint of physical hardware costs, this is really a great solution. Well, let's talk a little bit about FL Teacher Tool.
Yeah.
So tell me where that came from, and give me some understanding, or give our listeners some understanding of how that adds to LTSP.
Sure. Well, what happened with FL Teacher Tool was there was actually a program called Teacher Tool before FL Teacher Tool, and I think it was using tkinter for the GUI, for the graphical user interface, and I'm just trying to remember the author. It may have, I'm not quite sure on this, but I think it may have been somebody called Robert Melton. I'm not 100% on that, but in any case, it was okay. It was great for at the time what it could do. So a few people on the list were complaining and saying, well, geez, we can't have a scrollable list. So when you have a list of the users who are logged on to the server, you can't scroll through it. And it's funny because, I teach C++, and I was actually at the time even getting into programming GUI applications, once again, graphical user interface. And I was using a toolkit called FLTK, which stands for Fast Light Toolkit. It's one of the lesser-known toolkits out there. Probably the best ones, the best-known ones are GTK, which is used for GNOME, and Qt from a company called Trolltech, which is used for KDE. And so FLTK actually was easy to learn. It's very fast, very lightweight. It doesn't have as many kind of features as the bigger toolkits do, but then again, I didn't need that. So I was actually learning FLTK before I even had the inkling to write the program. And the summer of 2005, on my summer break, I just kind of had the idea, well, would it be easy to write the user interface using FLTK and basically, put in system calls, like little one-line bash script commands to be able to interact with the operating system and basically provide a better or, souped-up teacher tool. So I couldn't call it teacher tool. So I had to call it another name, and I thought, well, when I hummed and hawed, and I thought, well, a lot of programs that are written in FLTK have the FL before them. So I thought, okay, I'll just call it FL_teacher tool to kind of give homage to the fact that I wrote it using FLTK. And what I really found was it was not a difficult program to write because of the inherent advantages of the LTSP setup, in that basically all the users in the classroom are on one machine. And so because of that fact, you really don't need to communicate with other machines anywhere. It's very similar to having standalone boxes in the lab. A similar piece of software, which does exist, by the way, for that situation, commercial software, is a lot more difficult, I would imagine, to write because you have to start communicating more. You have more overhead for writing the communication to all those standalone machines, whereas in an LTSP setup, everybody's on one box. So all the info and all the processing that you need to do is all kind of, in a sense, local, even though they're all, separate machines in the classroom. So that's where I kind of got the idea, and I released my first version in September of 2005 after the summer, and after that, it just, people would say, oh, well, it'd be really nice if it did this, and I thought, well, how would I be able to implement that? And I kind of scratched my head and I thought, I could do that. So I slowly started adding things, and right now I'm on version 0.34, and believe it or not, it's actually, like, in terms of, if you talk to programmers, if you tell them, my program is approximately 1,300 lines of code, they'll say to you, usually the response I get is, wow, that's pretty small. And they say, what can it do again? And tell them what it can do, and you can do all that in that few lines of code. And the reason being, once again, is simply because everybody's on the same box. It's really a testament to how inherently advantageous it is, again, to have the LTSP set up.
So tell everybody again what exactly it is that the program does and why that's important. Okay.
It actually does quite a few things right now, the current version. I'll go through them one by one. When you start the program, it pops up a screen with a window on the right-hand side listing all the users who are logged in. So all the students and their usernames on the client's computers in the classroom. It also tells you their IP address. It also tells you how many megabytes of memory that particular student is consuming. It also tells you how many processes that student is running. Now, the reason why I put those up, you might think, well, why would you want to know that? Well, since everybody is kind of using the memory on one machine, if one student, for example, starts to use a lot of memory, more so than anybody else, FL Teacher Tool will kind of notify you that, hey, look at this one student. My goodness, he's using a lot of memory. I wonder what he's doing. So it kind of alerts you to that. Or perhaps, for example, this can happen in like a programming classroom where if a student is writing a program, I should say, intentionally or not, that forks new processes, meaning it might start new processes up. If they somehow get into an infinite loop and start popping up new processes, all of a sudden there's one student maybe running thousands of processes. Well, Teacher Tool will alert me to that and say, aha, this student's got a problem. So it can show me how much memory they're using, and how many processes they're running on the main window. But one thing I will kind of side note I'll tell you about that is the memory that it actually reports is the resident set size, which in a more simple way does not account for shared memory. So if I can give you a real quick explanation, let's say you have 30 students running Firefox. Well, if each student, let's say, is consuming 30 megabytes for Firefox, but 10 megabytes is shared, well, in actuality, then each student is really only using 20 megabytes because there is 10 megabytes of shared memory, which everybody shares. So that it doesn't really work out to 30 times 30. It would work out to like 30 times 20 plus 10. So that's something you need to keep in mind when you look at how much memory is being used. Now, what can you do? What can you do with all these users that you see in the list who are logged in? You can actually click on or select, highlight their names, and click on View button on the left-hand column, and it'll actually show you individual processes of the users. So it doesn't just tell you how much memory they're using overall, but it'll tell you all the programs they're running and how much memory each program is using, subsorted according to memory size. Now, the nice thing about that is for example, if you want to turn off Firefox for all the students in the classroom, all you do is simply select all the students in the main window, click View, type in Firefox in the input box in the View window, and click Find. It would select all those automatically, and then hit Kill. Now what you've done is you've turned off Firefox for every single student in the classroom. That's one example. And also, another nice, watch, I'll get to the other cool features is, I'll come back to this one because there's another point I'd like to make about that. But the next button is Run button, which basically allows the teacher to launch a program for any selected student or students in the classroom. There's a button called Find, which you might think, okay, how do you use that? Well, if you're a teacher and you want to figure out who in the classroom is using a certain program, and actually I found it much more useful to find the opposite of that. In other words, if you say to the class, okay, can everybody please start up their editor, for example, and you'd like to know who's not actually following your instructions, you can type in the name of the editor, like the one that I use is called Anjuda, and I'll click Find. It'll show me the students who have launched that program. Then I can click Reverse, which is the next button, which will show me the students who have not started that program. So then I can say, okay, well, Johnny, Tammy, Sarah, how come you guys haven't started this yet? So it allows me to kind of keep tabs on the students, keep them on task. So in other words, the Reverse button allows me to find which students are not running a particular program that perhaps I've asked them to start. The next button, the Broadcast button, is probably, in my opinion, the most important button in the program, and that is a button that allows me to start up a VNC reflector, which basically all it means is that I can pop open a window on my computer, on my terminal, wherever I'm sitting at the server or at a client myself as teacher, and start talking to the classroom, giving instructions, but at the same time, the students can watch me move my mouse, watch me type code, watch me show them how to, do a demonstration, regardless of what your area of curriculum is, and it's almost like having an overhead LCD projector at your fingertips, where you can say, okay, you broadcast this window to all the clients, all the students can watch you do a demonstration. That's really a valuable teaching tool. It saves the cost of actually purchasing an overhead LCD projector. And that is, I actually make use of a third-party program, like I said, Untitled Chapter, which was actually written, it's open source as well, by a person named Konstantin Kaplinski. So that's a really great feature. The next couple of features were added recently, and I'll have more to say about that later. Is monitor and control. They're kind of like sister functions. Monitor will allow me to actually look at the screen of a student who's sitting somewhere else. So usually I find, now this is again kind of like management issue. If a student's doing something that they're not supposed to be doing and they're not on task, if you, as a teacher, you get up, you walk around the class, the students see you coming, and they're obviously going to be minimizing or turning off the program, or if it's a game they're trying to run, or if it's if they're doing email instead of doing their work, whatever it may be. They're quite adept at kind of knowing where the teacher is, and so it's kind of hard to. I don't know. I don't like to use the word police them that way, but if you have a monitor feature, you can actually click on a student or students now and actually see what they're doing from where you're sitting. And what's really nice is even the fact that the students know that you can do that tends to keep them on task more, because they know that at any time I can see what they're doing, so that they tend not to do things they're not supposed to be doing. Control is actually a little different. Control not only allows me to see what they're doing, but also help them. So if a student puts up his hand and says, I'm having problems with this part of my program, and I can't figure out what my mistake is, I'll say, okay. I'll go, all right. Mark, he's right there. Click his username. Click Control. And now I say to the student, I say, okay, well, let go of your computer, let go of your mouse and your keyboard, and I can see what he's doing there, and I can actually physically, from where I'm sitting somewhere else, start editing and start controlling his mouse and keyboard, and the student can actually sit there at his seat, look at it, and see his code magically change and be corrected. And I'm talking to him and explaining to him at the same time as to why I'm doing what I'm doing, and so the efficiency of teaching in that situation it's wonderful. It's really great. And they like it too. They find it really cool, and it's neat, and it's of interest to them as well. So those are kind of monitor and control. And that was kind of those features were. I'll tell you about it after I've got a little story to tell you about that, but I'll come back to it. The next feature is distribute. And that's really handy too. Sometimes, teachers spend a lot of school resources on photocopying things. Now, if I want to distribute something, a lot of times I won't even photocopy it. I'll simply, grab the file, whether it's a PDF or whatever it may be, or a program file, and I'll simply select all my students or whoever I feel that it needs to go to, and click distribute. Distribute actually pops open a file browser, so I can, browse to the file I want to hand out, and I click, OK, and boom. Now all those students who I've selected have a copy of that file in their home directories. So it's a really fast way of electronically handing out, sheets of info, whatever it may be. The next feature is lock, and I just always wanted this myself, is because when you're in the classroom and being a computer teacher, when you need to make a point to the students and they're all working on their computers, we all know how mesmerizing a computer can be. A lot of times you have to say, excuse me, can I have your attention, please? Excuse me. A lot of kids their eyes and their whole focus is glued to the computer because whatever they're doing. Lock, what it does is it launches the screensaver on whoever I select. I can select the whole class, and boom, everybody's screensaver engages. All of a sudden, they can't see anything. They look up, boom, I've got their attention. So that's really handy as a teacher to use. And the nice thing is that they can actually unlock that using their own password, not mine. So it works out perfectly. So I've got their attention. I can explain whatever I need to explain to them and say, okay, get to it. And they type in their own password and off and going again. And the last two features are message and log off. Message is basically a way of sending a short, like one-line message to whoever I feel like sending it to, once again, selected or everybody. Like you have, let's say, if I'm giving them a programming test or whatever, I can say, you have 10 minutes left, boom, send out the message. Or, I'm going to be, I don't know, anything the teacher needs to tell everybody without, let's say, making it verbal, I can send out messages, or to selected students. Or if it's something that I'd like to, let's say, keep private, and I don't want to walk over and tell a student for whatever reason, I can just send him a little message on his screen, and he'll have a little pop-up with whatever I type. And log off, basically it just allows you to select the students who you wish to log off, and it'll basically force log off them. I thought it's a really easy thing to implement. I haven't used it a whole lot. Really, I tend to only use it when, say at the end of the day when there's students who have forgotten to log off, and I don't want to physically go around all the machines and go, click log off for all of them. It's just really fast for me to go, select everybody who forgot to log off, and that's what I use that for. So those are the features, and if you're still with me after all that long talk, I wanted to come back to monitor and control. This is actually, those two features are actually dependent upon something which K12LTSP did not have in the past. And what it is specifically is it's a VNC extension to X. So all the clients technically all the clients in the classroom run an X server, and they connect to the display manager on the server. But there was a file or a module and some other tidbits that were necessary in the LTSP build environment. So that's kind of like LTSP is kind of like an operating system within an operating system. So in the LTSP environment, there needed to be a change to happen for me to be able to use that feature. And initially, the way we got it to work was simply by a little hack. It worked. It wasn't optimal. It wasn't supposed to work, but it did. And so, with the new version of K12 LTSP that was coming out, version 5, which is the newest one that's been released, it didn't have this feature initially when it was still in beta. And what happened was, in April of this year, 2006, I went to Linux Fest Northwest in Bellingham, Washington, and there I met Jim McQuillan and Eric Harrison. And a couple of good things came out of that for me. One was Jim and Eric helped me speed up FL Teacher Tool. There was a feature that was kind of slowing it down, and so they offered suggestions as to how to speed it up, and I implemented it, and that worked, and I thanked them, and that was really great. And the other one, of course, was I was lobbying them to say, look, if you would add this file, or if you add this capability to LTSP, then I could take advantage of that with FL Teacher Tool and allow teachers to have this monitor and control feature that I just previously described. And, well, long story short, what happened? Eric Harrison goes away, I don't know, about a month or two later, he does it, I got to give him a big thank you that he actually figured out how to, build this package and add it to LTSP. And then what he did was he actually sent the patch upstream to Jim McQuillan in LTSP, and he included it in the latest 4.2, the latest version of LTSP. So, in essence, it's really empowering to think that, I'm just this kind of teacher who wrote this program, and I've affected or caused a change in LTSP, which allowed my program to have a feature that it never did. But not only that, now it's not just my program that would benefit, but anybody else who wanted to write a similar program would also be able to take advantage of that. And that's really been great. It's really empowering, and it's been a real sense of accomplishment too.
Well, you should feel really, really good about it. I mean, I've been working with Linux Thin Client almost for 3 years, and I cannot think of a time when I've presented it or displayed it to somebody when I did not get the question asked, can I use it to monitor what the kids are doing? And so clearly you've created something that's really made a huge difference. And all these features, at least to me, are ones that really stand out as being tremendously valuable. And so I think you should feel like you've done something really significant for the community, and I'll express thanks for that in my own small way just by saying it here.
Thank you. I really appreciate that, and I'll tell you, writing this program has. I'll just tell you that the reason why I kind of wrote it to begin with is not just because I wanted the program, but also because I felt like having Linux and having LTSP and K12LTSP was really such a wonderful and valuable piece of software to have, and for me personally to be able to use. And so I thought, well, how can I, repay the community? And obviously, there's no way I'd be able to repay financially. It's worth, it's pretty priceless what the whole open source community, what they've done for the whole world. But I thought, well, geez, what if I could write this program and kind of offer it for people to use? And it's really been great hearing stories from, even places like Norway. There's a guy up there who's the technician administrator for the entire city of Kongsvinger, Norway. And what they've done there is really interesting. They've actually got all their LTSP servers in City Hall in one building, and they've got fiber going out to all the schools. So the schools don't have any servers. They've all got just clients and printers in the schools, and they've got everything all the servers centralized in one building and fiber going out. Well, Tron calls me up or sends me an email and he says, "Wow, Teacher Tools, FL Teacher Tools, great. A teacher called me up and they were doing a demonstration and they couldn't figure out how to do something, and I just used your program to control their computer from my building and help them get through the problem. And thanks a lot." So stuff like that is just, when you hear that other people in the world are using your program and finding it valuable and useful, it's really great. It's really kind of gives you satisfaction in some way that it's hard to describe. That it's really you really feel like you're part of the open source movement.
Well, you certainly are. Why don't let's make sure that we tell people now exactly where to go to get instructions on installing it and to download the program.
Yeah, well, my homepage address is actually kind of long and hard to remember. The easiest way to actually find my homepage is just go to Google and type in FL_teacher tool. One word, TEACHERTOOL, and it's the first hit. There isn't any other program called FL Teacher Tool. But if you're using the latest version of K12LTSP, Eric Harrison has actually included it into the distribution, and I thank him once again for that. He's made it a part of the distribution, so you don't even have to download it. If you're using that program, you can it'll just simply be there once you've installed it. But for those people who want to install it themselves, I do provide installation instructions with the package. Now, it's not I don't actually personally distribute an RPM package. It's just a tarball which you have to untar. And I give detailed instructions on how to do that on my website. But at this point, the only thing that I've tried to run it on is K12LTSP. It will probably work with other versions of LTSP, although I know that it doesn't work out of the box with Ubuntu, because Ubuntu has a little bit different. They have what's called a Mucal implementation of LTSP. It's slightly different, uses SSH to the clients. It's so you have to kind of fiddle with that. But what I do know is that the Ubuntu guys, Oliver Grauer, started a version of a similar program. I think it's called Student Control Panel or something to that effect, and they're writing it in GTK, not FLK, because they have some more restrictions as to what programs Ubuntu can have included. However, I have offered them my source and say, take whatever bits and pieces you feel that you would find useful. So hopefully they'll get one, a program similar up running. I'm sure they will as well.
That is really great. So I think this is probably a good place to end, if that's okay with you.
Yeah.
Let me thank you for taking the time, and our connection seems to have stayed up pretty well. You were pretty clear almost all of the interview, and again, thanks to Skype for the ability to do this and to do it inexpensively.
Can I just say one thing before we end?
Absolutely.
Steve, I just wanted to actually give the contributors of FL Teacher Tool mention, and once again, the contributors, I've got them listed in my credits, but once again, they're Tron Malum, Auden Wangen, Shams King, and Henry Burroughs for actually allowing me to get rid of the X-host security issue and fix it with an MIT magic cookie method of doing things, kind of technical. But another person is Toshio Kiritomi, who helped me with the Makefile, and of course Konstantin Kaplinsky for VNC Reflector. And last but not least, most of all, I'd like to thank Eric Harrison, because he's actually helped me with FL Teacher Tool pretty much the whole way for all my releases, and a lot of scripting help. Eric's kind of a bash scripting genius. So I really want to give those people credit where credit's due.
Well, I'll give thanks to Tosho right away, since he sits across the desk from me.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. Hey, that's great. Sure appreciate your being on, and we'll look forward to hearing good future things about FL Teacher Tool.
Thank you.